Hey everyone, today I'm sharing 10 disturbing stories from people who were alone in the woods and something terrifying happened. But before we start, please make sure to like and subscribe. It really helps the channel and you can change your mind later. And if you've got any ideas for what the next video should be, feel free to drop them down in the comments. My Uncle Greg had this chunk of land near a place called Fairbridge Hollow, right up against the edge of Bear Mill State Forest. That winter, he asked if I wanted to help clear it out. I figured why not? School was out for the holidays, I didn't have anything better to do, and honestly, the idea of spending a weekend alone in the woods sounded kind of peaceful. So I loaded up the truck and drove out there. This was a few days before Christmas. The roads were rough, icy, and narrow, winding through the hills like they were trying to shake you off, but I made it. The place looked exactly like I remembered. Small, plain, a little crooked. The kind of place that creaks even when nothing's moving. First night was uneventful. I split some wood, patched up the window seals with duct tape, and tried to make the inside feel a little less like a crypt. I lit the heater, set up my cot in the corner, and spent most of the evening flipping through a beat-up paperback I found wedged in the floorboards. When I turned in, the wind was dragging across the trees outside like it had claws, but it didn't bother me. It was just background noise. The second night, though, something changed. It was around 10. I was sitting on the cot reading again when I heard it. 3 distinct crunches in the snow out back. Slow, measured, deeper, not the scurry of a rabbit or the clumsy shuffle of a deer. These were footsteps. Human. I froze. Just sat there, staring at the wall, listening. Then another sound, closer this time. A single crunch. Like someone stepping forward and then stopping. I turned off the lamp. Everything went dead quiet. I could feel my pulse in my throat. I didn't move for a full minute. Then I reached down and grabbed the shotgun I'd kept loaded next to the cot. My uncle made me bring it just in case, but I'd mostly been using it to prop up my backpack. I crept over to the back window and peeked through a slat in the boards. Nothing. Just darkness and snow. The woods looked still, but they always look still until they don't. Eventually, I sat back down, shotgun across my lap, and stayed that way until I dozed off sometime after midnight. Next morning, I told myself it was probably a raccoon or maybe a tree branch shifting under the snow. I believed it for about 5 seconds, right up until I stepped outside. There were boot prints in the snow. Not mine, not even close. These were big, longer stride, adult-sized. They circled the cabin twice in wide loops, like someone pacing slowly around the place, thinking. Then they stopped. Not faded, not trailed off, just stopped, mid-step pointed toward the woods. Like whoever it was had been yanked straight into the sky. I just stood there for a while staring at them, trying to come up with a reasonable explanation. I even laughed a little, out loud, just to test if I still could. I packed up right after that. I'd planned to stay another night, but I didn't even want to finish breakfast. I shoved everything into the truck, turned the key, and nothing. No click, no crank. Dead. The battery had been fine the night before. Radio worked. Lights worked. Now it was like the truck didn't even know it had an engine. I checked under the hood like I knew what I was doing, saw nothing obvious, and decided to hike to the gas station down the road. It was 5 miles, maybe a little more. I'd done it before with my uncle, though never in December. By the time I got moving, snow had started falling harder. Big, heavy flakes that made it tough to tell where the trail ended and the trees began. Visibility dropped fast. After about an hour, I looked down and noticed more boot prints on the trail. Not mine, smaller this time, shorter stride. They were heading in the same direction I was, but I hadn't seen anyone all morning. Hadn't heard anything either. The weirdest part? The prints started halfway into the trail, like someone had just appeared there, behind me. No entrance point, just a fresh set of steps following me. I sped up, tried not to look back, but after another 10 minutes, I did. I couldn't help it. There were 2 sets now, both behind me, both walking in step, close enough that I should have heard them, should have seen them. I called out just once, something stupid like, "Hello?" My voice sounded weird in the snow, thin, flat, like it didn't want to go too far. No one answered. I started running, just full on, breath in your throat sprinting. My pack bounced against my back with every step, and my boots kept slipping in the snow, but I didn't care. Eventually, I came to a fork in the trail. Left went downhill toward the main road. Right climbed a ridge to an old fire watchtower I remembered from when I was little. I don't know why I went right. Maybe I thought I'd get better reception. Maybe I just wanted to get somewhere high and lock a door behind me. The stairs up the tower were a nightmare, covered in ice, half rotted. I had to move slowly, gripping the rail with both hands. Slipped once and smashed my elbow so hard I thought I broke it. At the top, I shoved the hatch open with my shoulder and crawled into the tower. It was cold, dusty, abandoned. The windows were boarded from the inside, and there was a sour, stale smell in the air, like old insulation and mouse droppings. But I didn't care. I was inside. I sat down in the corner and tried to get my breathing under control. My heart was hammering so loud it sounded like a drum in my chest. I peered through a crack in the boards and looked down the trail. At first, I didn't see anything. Then, just before sunset, they showed up. 3 figures. Coats, no flashlights, no sound, just walking. The first one stopped at the base of the hill. The other 2 came up behind and stood there. They didn't call out, didn't move. They just waited. I backed away from the window and curled up behind an old tarp. Didn't sleep. Couldn't. Every hour or so, I crept back to look. Sometimes they were gone. Sometimes one of them was closer, but they never climbed the hill. When the sun came up, I checked again. Nothing. Trail was clean. Not even a footprint. I climbed down, didn't stop to rest, and ran straight for the road. My legs ached, my lungs felt like ice, but I didn't slow down. A salt truck found me maybe a mile from the gas station. The guy inside gave me a blanket and called the sheriff. They drove me back to the cabin to look around. The prints were gone, all of them, even the ones I'd seen the day before. Like the snow had ironed itself flat. The sheriff asked if I'd been drinking. I told him no, told him what I saw. He nodded slowly and didn't write anything down. My uncle sold the property that spring. Said he was done with fixer-uppers. Never mentioned the cabin again. The guy who bought it came out once, boarded up the windows, and left a week later. The trail wasn't long, just shy of 3 miles total, but it felt longer coming down in the dark. I'd figured I'd be up and back before it got properly late, but I didn't account for how fast the light disappears in December. I'd gone up the ridge alone to try and get a signal. My cousin Ray was off for the week helping one of her neighbors cut and haul firewood, and I said I'd stay behind to feed the dogs and keep the place from freezing over. I'm not from the area exactly. Grew up in a small town about an hour and a half away, but I'd been to Ray's enough times to know the woods around her place. They weren't unfamiliar. The ridge trail was steep and winding, but well marked. Nothing tricky. I figured I'd hike up, send a few texts, maybe check the weather, and get back down before full dark. That didn't pan out. At the top, I had nothing. Not even a flicker. I tried the usual routine, held my phone in the air, spun in slow circles like some kind of desperate scarecrow, hoping the sky would notice. The phone didn't budge. No bars, no roaming. Just a cold biting deeper and the wind pushing harder across the ridge. I gave up after a few minutes. My hands were numb and the light was fading fast. I had my flashlight, but still, the trail down was rough. It's narrow, with loose shale in places, and the boots I was wearing had just about 0 tread left. I didn't want to take a spill halfway down and spend the night crumpled around a rock, so I took it slow. Flashlight out, watching my step. I was about halfway down when I saw him. At first, I thought I was seeing a tree out of place or maybe a large stump, but then it moved, just a shift, and I realized it was a person, standing just off the trail, not really hidden, just waiting. He was behind a pine, maybe 10 feet from me. No sound, no warning. I didn't hear anyone coming up. Nothing. I stopped and lifted the flashlight. He stepped forward slightly, just enough to be clearly visible. Worn jeans, long brown coat that hit around the knees, pale face, but it was the eyes that got me. He didn't blink or flinch at the light, just stared at me like the beam wasn't even there. "Hey," I said, trying to sound casual. "You all right?" No answer, no shift in posture, not even the sound of breath. He was completely still. "You lost or something?" Still nothing. I felt my throat tighten, but I kept my tone calm. Maybe he was drunk. Maybe he'd gotten turned around. But who hikes up here this time of year with no light, no gloves, and no gear? He took a slow step forward. I started backing up, keeping the flashlight on him. The trail was narrow here, no room to turn around fast without risking a fall. Then he smiled. It wasn't wide, wasn't friendly either. It was like he knew something I didn't. He asked, "You come up from the hollow?" His voice was thin, kind of scratchy, like he hadn't used it in a while. No strong accent, but it felt wrong, hard to explain. "Yeah," I said, "staying at Ray's. Just heading back." He nodded slowly. "That's good. You want to keep going?" "I plan to," I said, and tried to give a little laugh, like it was all fine, no big deal. He moved again, just a step, almost casual, and slipped his hand into his coat. That's when my stomach turned. I thought he might be pulling a knife or something worse. My grip tightened on the flashlight, but he didn't pull a weapon. He pulled out something else. Thin, dark, looked like a length of wire or cord. Held it loose in his fingers. "You're gonna hear something soon," he said. "Might sound like it's behind you. Might sound like it's ahead. You don't stop." I didn't respond. I didn't move. Then he said, "If you see another me, don't talk to it. Don't look at it." Then he smiled again, wider this time, turned and walked off into the trees. Not down the trail, just sideways, into the dark. I stood there a moment longer, trying to convince myself not to run. Then I started moving, not sprinting, not yet, but fast, careful, focused. At first, all I could hear was my own breath and the crunch of boots on frostbitten leaves. Then I heard something else, behind me. It wasn't exactly footsteps, more like something brushing through the undergrowth, matching my pace. I picked up speed. It did too. I spun, light swinging behind me. No one there. I kept going. Faster. I hit a bend in the trail, slipped a little, caught myself on a tree. Looked up and there he was, same guy, same coat. Standing in the middle of the trail, just far enough away that I couldn't make out his face. He said, "You stopped," but his mouth didn't move, his voice didn't carry through the air. It just landed in my head like it was already there. I turned and ran. I didn't care about the trail. I didn't care if I fell. I just ran. But the trail started to feel wrong. The turns weren't where they should have been. Landmarks were off. A dip that hadn't been there earlier. A downed tree that looked too fresh. I passed that same slab of rock I'd stood on at the top. My boot print was still there in the frost. I'd looped. Someone was up ahead again. I didn't wait to see who. I cut left off the trail, crashing through underbrush, ducking branches. The slope dipped hard and I slid, tumbling partway down, catching myself on roots and rocks. Downhill, I could see the floodlight from Ray's barn through the trees, a faint yellow glow that looked like safety. I pushed toward it. Branches clawed at me. I tripped, rolled, got back up, hit a steep drop and slid the rest of the way to the creek. The water was ankle deep and bitter cold. I splashed across, skin going numb instantly, and clawed up the opposite bank. I didn't turn around, but I heard it, someone stepping into the water behind me. I ran until the clearing broke open in front of me. The porch light was still on. The dogs were barking inside like they were losing their minds. I didn't use the key, just slammed into the door with my shoulder, burst inside, and locked everything behind me. The dogs circled me, tails down, hackles up, not barking anymore, just low, uncertain growls. I crouched by the wood stove, flashlight off. Stayed there for over an hour, waiting for something to knock, to call out. Nothing did. When Ray got back 3 days later, I barely said anything. Just that I'd gotten turned around, saw someone weird in the woods, kept it vague. I didn't want to talk about it. A few years back, I ended up spending a weekend alone at my uncle's hunting cabin. It's buried deep in the woods outside a tiny town called Blue Bank. If you blink while driving through, you'll miss the whole thing. Just a gas station, a diner with unpredictable hours, and a hardware store that sells mostly fishing gear and jerky. Uncle Ray used to take me and a few of my cousins up there every fall for hunting season. It was kind of a tradition. We'd spend a few days tracking deer, playing cards, pretending not to be scared of the outhouse at night. That year, though, everybody else had something going on. School, jobs, kids. I was the only one bugging him to still go. I needed to get out of town, clear my head, and that place had always felt like a good reset. I drove up on a Friday afternoon. Got there just before dark, the kind of timing where the woods go from shadowy to pitch black in a matter of minutes. The air smelled sharp, like pine sap and frozen dirt. The cabin was just as I remembered it. Weathered wood, tiny porch, a warped screen door that didn't latch right. Inside was cold and musty, but it had a propane heater and a cot with clean sheets. No phone signal, no Wi-Fi, no neighbors for miles. It was like stepping out of the world. That first night was calm. I unpacked, heated up some canned chili, and played a few games of solitaire by lantern light. The wind outside picked up around midnight, pushing at the windows like it was trying to get in. But I'd grown up hearing those sounds. They didn't bother me. I slept like a rock. Next morning, I got up early and hiked the lower ridge to look for tracks. Nothing. Not even squirrel or rabbit prints. It was too quiet. No birdsong, no rustling, just snow starting to fall in slow, lazy flakes. I shrugged it off. Weather like that tends to make everything hunker down. By mid-afternoon, snow was coming down hard. I lit a fire in the barrel stove and settled in. The cabin warmed up slowly, but it helped. I made some soup, read an old paperback I found on the shelf, and stayed inside. Snow didn't stop. By evening, it had started piling up against the door. I went to bed early, figured I'd head out the next day, maybe take the long route back and see if anything crossed the creek. I'd just started drifting off when I heard this low, creaking noise. Not the stove, not the cabin settling. It sounded like pressure on wood-like weight. I sat up, heart suddenly racing. Listened. Nothing. Nothing. I told myself it was snow shifting on the roof. That happens. I checked the time, just past 1. The flashlight flickered when I turned it on, but it steadied after a few taps. I swept the beam toward the window, but all I saw was snow piled up halfway, pressed against the glass. I lay back down, ears straining. Silence. Then I heard it again. A little slower this time. Just one long creak. It wasn't close, but it wasn't far. I didn't sleep well after that, kept my boots on, just in case. I must have dozed off eventually because the next sound that woke me up was much sharper. A sudden, deliberate thump. Like something had landed on the porch. I bolted upright, hand already on the flashlight. The beam swung to the door. Nothing moved. But I didn't lie back down. I sat there for over an hour, holding my breath every time the wind shifted. Eventually, the sky started to lighten, and I let myself relax. Then I looked outside. That's when I saw the prints. Just one set. Big, wide apart. The kind of stride that didn't make sense, too long to be natural. They came from the woods, looped around the cabin once, and ended at the back wall. No return trail. I grabbed my .22 and followed them out. The prints were deep, sunk into the snow like whoever made them weighed a lot, more than a person should really. I followed them to the back wall where I noticed something else. The shed key was gone. There's a little hook under the eaves, half rusted, where Ray always kept it, empty now. The padlock on the shed still looked secure, but I didn't go closer. I just backed away slowly and returned inside. That night, I didn't even try to sleep. I wedged a chair under the doorknob, loaded the rifle, and sat near the window with every light on. Nothing happened, but I kept seeing movement out of the corner of my eye, little shadows where there weren't any. By morning, I was done. I packed my gear, layered up, and opened the front door. And froze. Something had nailed a dead bird, tiny, black, freshly killed, right into the doorframe. Blood had dripped onto the snow below, bright red and recent. The nail looked old, like it had been yanked from somewhere and reused. I didn't even lock the door behind me. I just started walking. The main road was snowed in, so I cut across the ridge, aiming for the highway. It was a longer route, but I'd taken it before. I could make it out before dark if I moved fast. The trees started thinning as I climbed, and that's when I saw more prints. Same size, same awkward spacing. Headed toward the old fire tower. What was left of it anyway. It collapsed years ago, just a pile of rotting beams now. I gave those tracks a wide berth. Somewhere below me, a branch snapped. Not a little one either, loud enough to make me stop. I turned around. Nothing, just woods and white. But everything was still, way too still. No birds, no wind in the trees. Even the snow felt heavy, like the air didn't want to move. I kept walking. Eventually, I reached the gravel road. I had just enough signal to text my dad that I was heading out early. The message took a minute to send, but it went through. 10 minutes later, my phone buzzed again. I thought maybe it was him checking in, but it wasn't. The screen said unknown, and the message just said, "Don't come back without my key." I stopped in my tracks. My mouth went dry. I stared at the screen too long. Then another one came through. "You left my door open." I turned around, slow. Still nothing. No tracks behind me. No sound. Just snow hissing sideways in the wind. My legs didn't want to move, but I forced them. 15 minutes later, I heard something else. A laugh. It wasn't close, but it wasn't far either. It came riding on the wind, thin and weirdly cheerful, like someone pretending they knew what laughing sounded like, trying too hard to fit in. There was something off about it, too long, too forced, like it didn't belong in a human throat. I ran, didn't look back, didn't stop until I saw headlights. A long-haul trucker picked me up. I told him I'd gotten lost while hunting. He gave me a bottle of water and didn't ask any more questions. A few weeks later, the cabin burned down. No official cause. Ray didn't rebuild. He sold the land and moved out west. My cousin Jordan owns a small patch of land down near Greystone Hollow, southeast Tennessee. His old hunting cabin is tucked into a clearing, maybe a mile and a half off Bear Hook Trail. I packed a week's worth of supplies, cans, dry goods, instant coffee, more instant coffee, and a propane heater just in case the wood stove flaked out on me. Left my phone in the glove compartment on purpose. I didn't want to see notifications. I didn't want the option. I drove up in early December, right before the roads started getting icy. The cabin was about what I remembered. Small, quiet, just one room with a narrow bunk, a crooked shelf full of ancient paperbacks, and the iron stove right in the middle like some grumpy old fixture. It smelled faintly like wood smoke and damp socks, but in a cozy way. Out back was a tool shed with a padlock on it and a rusted folding chair half buried in leaves. No plumbing, obviously. You bring your own water or melt snow if you're desperate. That first day, I spent hours chopping wood. It's the kind of work that tires you out in a good way. Makes your hands ache but clears your head. When the lights started going pink through the trees, I cooked up some canned chili on the hot plate, cracked open a beer, and settled into the bunk with an old mystery novel. I think it was missing half its pages, but I didn't care. The quiet was doing something good to my brain. Then, around 9 that night, while I was reading by lantern light, I heard footsteps. At first, I didn't react. Could have been a deer, a fox, maybe even just snow slipping off the roof. But then it kept going. Not just one set, two, slow, crunching in a deliberate rhythm, like two people walking in a wide circle around the cabin. I sat up slowly and turned off the lantern. Just sat there, listening. It went quiet for a bit. Then I heard the crunch again, fainter, off in the trees. I didn't move, didn't breathe. After a few more minutes, the sound faded completely. I didn't sleep much that night. In the morning, I stepped outside into fresh powder. A couple inches had fallen overnight, covering everything clean. I checked the area around the cabin, half expecting to see clear footprints, but there was nothing definitive. The snow had masked any detail. Still, behind the cabin, I noticed something weird. Not tracks exactly, but a single straight line of indentations leading from the wall into the woods. Almost like someone had dragged a pole or stick. It wasn't jagged or sloppy, it was even. Intentional. It made my skin crawl. But I told myself it could be anything. Maybe a branch fell and got pulled by wind. Maybe an animal. I didn't know. I made breakfast, brewed some gritty cowboy coffee, and tried to shake it off. That second night, I kept the lantern on. I didn't want to sit in the dark with my imagination running wild. Just before midnight, I heard knocking. Not on the door, from under the floor. 3 knocks, evenly spaced. Then nothing. Now, the cabin's raised a couple feet off the ground, sitting on old cinder blocks. There's a crawl space underneath, but no one sane would try to wedge themselves in there. Too narrow, too rocky, probably full of raccoons and old nails. Still, I grabbed the flashlight, opened the front door, and swept the beam around the base of the cabin. Nothing, no movement, no sign of anyone or anything. But when I came back inside, I noticed something else. My boots were gone. I'd left them by the bunk, inside, right next to my bag. They weren't there. I checked the corner, under the bunk, near the stove. Nothing. Just empty floorboards and the strange, low creaking of the wood as I paced. That night, I stayed up fully dressed, sitting against the far wall with the propane heater on low. I kept waiting for some sound footsteps, another knock, but the silence was worse. It felt stretched, like the kind of silence that listens back. In the morning, I opened the door and the boots were on the porch. Clean, completely dry, not a speck of mud or snow. Just placed neatly side by side like someone had set them there with care. I didn't touch them. Not at first. I stood in the doorway for a good 10 minutes just staring at them. Eventually, I put them on. They felt warm, like they'd been inside all night. Later that day, I decided to check the shed for the backup propane tank. I hadn't needed it yet, but after everything else, I didn't want to be caught without heat. The key was still hanging on the nail by the window, but when I got out there, the padlock was hanging loose and the door was slightly open. Inside, the tools were all still there. Saw, axe, shovel, a tangled extension cord. But on top of a broken lawn chair in the corner was a backpack I definitely hadn't brought. Olive green. Duct tape wrapped around the straps. Looked worn down, like it had been dragged around for years. I opened it. Inside was a doll. Human-shaped. Wrapped tight in off-white cloth, like gauze or an old bedsheet. The eyes were hand-drawn with black ink, oversized and slightly crooked, with short, jagged lines radiating out like lashes. The mouth was sewn shut with thick, black cord. No limbs visible, just the outline under the wrapping, like someone had tied it down too tight. I zipped it back up, walked it to the edge of the woods, and set it down gently. I didn't throw it. Didn't want to look panicked. I just left it there and walked back, feeling like I was being watched the entire time. That night, I turned off everything. No lantern, no fire. Just sat there in the dark, wrapped in 2 blankets, holding the flashlight and listening. At 1:32, I heard steps on the roof. Light, careful steps. Not scrambling like an animal. Pacing. One slow step at a time, all the way from one edge of the cabin to the other. The roof creaked softly with each shift of weight. Then silence. I stayed absolutely still for hours, not even sure if I blinked. By dawn, I'd packed everything. I wasn't trying to wait out the week anymore. I wasn't trying to make sense of any of it. I just wanted out. When I opened the door to leave, I saw a carving on the inside. I swear it hadn't been there before. A circle with 3 arrows pointing inward toward the center, rough but clear, like it had been scraped in with a knife or a nail. I stepped outside. The snow was fresh again, just a thin layer, no footprints near the cabin. But about half a mile down the trail, I saw them bare human footprints, not boots. Bare feet, toes, heel, the whole shape, headed in the same direction I was going. They ran alongside my trail for a while, then veered off into the woods. I didn't stop walking. When I got back to my truck, there was something hanging from the driver's side mirror. A charm made from 3 twigs, tied into a circle with rough twine. Same symbol. It swung lightly in the breeze, tapping the window. I left it there. I drove to a cheap motel in Winslow and locked the door behind me. Around 3 in the morning, there was a single knock. Just one, sharp, then nothing. Next morning, I left the key on the counter and didn't say a word to the guy behind the desk. I'd landed this winter caretaker job through a friend of a friend. The gig was to watch over a privately owned trailhead lodge about 6 miles past Halter Gap, up in the Blue Ridge foothills in Braxton County. The couple who owned it, Mary and Ron, were both retired park rangers who'd built the place themselves years ago as a kind of quiet escape. And for the first week or so, it was exactly that. Quiet. Solitary, sure, but peaceful in the kind of way you don't appreciate until you've been alone long enough to forget what traffic sounds like. There was no cell signal at the cabin. Nothing at all once you passed the tree line. I could check emails if I hiked 5 minutes back down the access road, but that got old quick. After a few days, I stopped bothering. I settled into a rhythm, checking the generator in the morning, bringing in firewood, running water through the pipes so nothing froze, reading, eating, trying to keep warm. That particular night, the snow had stopped falling by 6. I remember that clearly because I was outside stacking wood when it tapered off. The sky went this kind of flat gray and everything got weirdly still. I could hear the snow melt dripping off the edge of the roof before it froze again. I locked up the wood bin, double-checked the door, then made my usual rounds, looked at the propane tank, confirmed the generator was still running. Everything was fine. I went upstairs to brush my teeth and call it a night. That's when I heard the knock. 3 of them, distinct. Not loud, not frantic, just there. Like someone tapping their knuckles softly against the wood. It wasn't the front door. It came from the side of the cabin, the wall next to the bathroom. Now, the thing about that side of the house is there's no porch, no path. It just drops off into a slope filled with tangled rhododendron and pine roots. Even in daylight, it's not something you'd casually hike up. In the dark, through snow, you'd have to know exactly where you were going. You'd have to want to be there. I stood there with my toothbrush still in my mouth, completely still, just listening. Nothing else followed. No footsteps, no voices, no more knocking. After a while, I spit in the sink, turned off the bathroom light, and stepped quietly down the hallway toward the narrow window. From there, I could see a sliver of the slope and the trees beyond, all silver blue in the moonlight. No movement, no tracks, just the wind pushing faint ripples across the snow. I stared out for maybe 5 minutes. Then I went back to the bedroom. I didn't get undressed. Just lay down on top of the blanket in jeans and a sweatshirt, left the light on, and stared at the door. I kept listening, straining for anything that might explain those knocks. Hours passed. I must have dozed off at some point because the next thing I remember, I was waking up suddenly to a noise above me. Something shifted on the roof, slowly. It wasn't snow sliding off or branches creaking. It had a weight to it, something alive. I held my breath and listened again. The roof is steep. Steep enough that I'd never even considered someone might be able to walk on it. But this wasn't walking. The sound was too careful, too slow. It was like something, or someone, was crawling across the shingles. My whole body tensed. I sat up in bed, heart hammering, not even blinking. The sound moved steadily for a few seconds, then stopped. I stayed frozen like that for 20 minutes, not sure if I was more afraid to move or afraid I'd start hearing it again. Eventually, I got up and crept downstairs, quiet as I could. The stairs creaked once, and I stopped immediately, holding still, listening. Still nothing. Just the steady, low hum of the generator outside. I made it to the living room and grabbed the flashlight from the side table. Then I moved to the front windows and aimed the beam toward the roofline, hoping maybe I'd catch sight of something. A boot, a piece of clothing, Anything that would make sense. There was nothing. Just the snow piled along the edge of the roof and the pale outline of tree branches swaying in the wind. I didn't go back upstairs. I stayed in the living room the rest of the night, sitting on the couch with the flashlight in my lap. I didn't light the fire again, just let it burn down to cold ash while I watched the window and waited. Whatever it was, never came back. When the first light started coming through the trees, I opened the front door and stepped outside. Everything looked exactly the same. Still, untouched. But then I saw the footprints, one set, coming down from the ridge behind the cabin. Not fresh fallen snow anymore. It had crusted a little overnight, but the prints were still visible, crisp enough to follow. They curved around the house, careful and direct, until they stopped beneath the wall on the slope side. The same side where I'd heard the knock. I looked at them closely. They weren't boot prints. That was the first thing I noticed. The shape was off, narrow at the heel and wider toward the toes, like someone had their feet wrapped in strips of cloth, or maybe duct tape. No tread, just smooth impressions. And then I looked up at the wall. Right under the hall window were 6 or 7 long scratch marks. Clean, even, running straight up and down, shallow but clear like finger grooves worn into the wood, as if someone had gripped the siding and pulled themselves upward. There wasn't any ladder, no rope, no tool marks, just those scratches and one cedar shingle near the roof that had been torn partially off, split along the grain, the edge curled outward like something had snagged it on the way up. I circled the entire cabin 3 times. Nothing else. No return trail, no other tracks, no animals. Just that one path coming in from the trees and ending at the side of the house. I stayed inside the rest of the day, ate cold food, didn't go near the window. Every sound felt louder. The wind, the creak of the floor. Even the ticking of the propane heater started to sound wrong. That night, I pushed a chair up under the doorknob and dragged the couch in front of it, just in case. I didn't sleep, didn't even sit down. When Mary and Ron came back 3 days later, I helped them unload their car, handed them the spare keys, and told them everything had gone smoothly. They asked if the generator held up okay. I said yes. They asked if I'd seen any hikers. I told them no. Then I took my check and left. I'd found this listing for a remote cabin just outside of a town called Harper's Hollow, somewhere along the Virginia stretch of the Appalachian backwoods. I'd never heard of the place before, but it looked quiet, exactly what I needed. Finals had just ended, and the whole semester had felt like I was running on fumes. I had this little window of time between the end of fall classes and going home for the holidays, and I didn't tell anyone where I was going. The paved road stopped about 4 miles from the trailhead. After that, it was all packed dirt and scattered rock, and by the time I parked, snow had already started falling. I remember tightening the straps on the borrowed pack I'd brought and just standing there for a second, watching the first flakes melt on my jacket. The hike in took maybe 45 minutes, cutting across this narrow ridge trail with nothing but bare trees and that soft, quiet sound of snow building up over old leaves. It was peaceful but also hollow, like the woods had hit mute. By the time I reached the cabin, it was late afternoon and getting dark fast. I didn't waste time. I lit the stove, popped open a can of chili, and passed out on top of the sleeping bag I never even unrolled. The next morning, I woke to silence. Snow was already knee-deep outside. Everything was still. No birds, no wind, no creaking trees. Just that thick, muffled pressure you get when snow covers every surface. It made the air feel heavy, like I was underwater. I stayed inside most of the day, just reading, scribbling thoughts into a little notebook I kept for class ideas, and reheating soup on the stove. The kind of day where time stretches in weird ways. You stop checking the clock because it doesn't really matter. Around 6, I stacked some logs by the stove, boiled water for tea, and thought, yeah, this was the right move. That changed after dark. It started with a single crunch, not close, just barely loud enough to hear, like someone stepping on frozen underbrush. I froze. The stove had burned low by then, so the room was mostly shadows, and the cabin didn't have any windows on the wall that faced the tree line. I stayed perfectly still, listening, then nothing. Just that one step and silence. Until a few minutes later, when I heard it again. 2 steps this time. Then a third, slower, like someone changing their mind mid-stride. I tried to explain it away. Could have been a deer, maybe a stray dog, but it didn't sound like hooves. It didn't sound like paws. It sounded like feet. 1 step. Wait, 2 more. Wait, then nothing again. I crept over to the window and pulled the curtain back just an inch. Snow, fog, trees, and a single straight line of prints leading from the woods to the porch, deep and narrow, almost too narrow. They didn't look like boot prints. Not really. I stared for a long time trying to figure out what I was looking at. Then I heard it. Not footsteps, breathing. Right outside the front door. Slow, measured breaths. Close enough that I could almost feel the exhale through the wood. I backed away. There's an iron poker by the stove about 2 feet long, solid and heavy. I picked it up, hands shaking more than I'd like to admit, and just stood there. I didn't hear anything else for a long time. No retreating steps. No movement. Then came the knock. Just one, dull and flat, like someone tapping with the side of their hand. No urgency. No second try. Just that single, deliberate thud. I didn't respond. I didn't speak. I didn't even blink for what felt like a full minute. Eventually, I checked the window again. The footprints were gone. Not covered, gone. Like the snow had erased itself. Smooth, untouched surface from the woods to the porch. Even my own prints from earlier had vanished. I didn't sleep. The next morning I went outside to get firewood. I kept telling myself I'd imagined it. Cabin fever, isolation, just my brain filling in gaps. But when I stepped off the porch, I noticed these long, shallow marks dragging through the snow. Like someone had pulled a sled or a person into the woods. Straight line. No tracks leading toward the cabin, only away. I didn't own a sled. Still, I stayed. I know that sounds stupid, but part of me didn't want to seem ridiculous, like I'd freaked out over some weird animal prints and an overactive imagination. The other part, well, I wasn't totally sure what I'd seen, and I didn't want to find out what else was in those woods. That night, I barricaded the door with the poker and a chair. I didn't light the fire. I figured, if I kept things dark, maybe whatever it was wouldn't see me. Around midnight, something shifted. I don't know how to explain it. It wasn't a noise or a shadow. It was a change in pressure, like the cabin wasn't sealed anymore, like the air inside had started leaking. Then I heard it, a low whisper. Not words exactly, just this rhythmic murmur, like someone trying to speak through the cracks in the cabin walls. I pressed my ear to the logs and couldn't tell if it was coming from inside or outside. Then another knock. This time, from the back wall, the one with no door. I didn't move. I held my breath and waited. The knocking continued. Slow, measured, moving around the cabin. Back wall, left side, then the front again. Always one knock. Pause, another knock, like it was mapping the place. At some point, I noticed frost forming on the inside of the front door. A thin, jagged line, like the cold was reaching through. I checked the stove, still cold. No cracks in the walls, no open windows. And then I heard myself, my own voice, from the woods. Help, it said. Please, I fell. I'm hurt. The tone was exact, same cadence, same pitch. It was like someone had recorded me asking for help and was playing it back through an old speaker. I stepped back from the window. Please help, it said again. Closer this time. I can't walk. Then I saw it, just beyond the trees, low to the ground, crawling. Its arms, if that's what they were, bent in the wrong places. It wasn't walking. It was dragging itself forward, pulling with its elbows. The way someone might move if their legs didn't work. I never saw the face. I backed into the cabin's dry closet and shut the door. It barely latched. I sat with my knees to my chest, holding the poker and waiting for the light to change. When morning came, Everything outside was untouched. No drag marks, no prints, not even my own from the day before. But on the front door, scratched in rough, repeating strokes, was a single word, "Come back," not two words, one. Like someone unfamiliar with how language works had tried to replicate something they'd heard. I didn't pack. I left my coat, my bag, even my boots. I shoved my feet into the thinnest pair of sneakers I'd brought, grabbed the stove poker, and walked the entire 4 miles back to my car without stopping once. That winter, I was doing a 3-day loop before the snow came in heavy. I'd been out there a few times before, but not that late in the season. I figured I could squeeze in one last trip before the back roads iced up for good. I wasn't looking for anything dramatic, just quiet. Just space. I found a decent little spot to tuck in under a rock ledge that looked out over the hill. I dropped my pack, set up my bivvy, and started a small fire to warm some coffee. My boots came off. Gloves stuffed into the sleeves of my coat. I stretched out against my pack and started going over the map again under my headlamp, just double-checking my plan for the next day. That's when I saw it. There was a red mark on the corner of the map, a thin line, slashed right across the edge of the section I had circled. Now, I know that sounds like nothing, but I'd bought that map new from a gas station in Harmonville just the day before. I always double-check them for folds, smudges, anything weird. I treat gear seriously, and that mark hadn't been there earlier. It wasn't a trail line or a topographic detail, just a single curved slash, almost like someone dragged a red pen across it, just above where I had marked my intended camp. My first thought was, maybe it was some kind of printing error, or a mark that had been missed when I looked before. I was tired. I let it go. An hour or so passed. I got up to pee just off into the woods, maybe 20 yards. The moonlight had that gray, washed-out look to it. No clouds, just bare branches and frost crackling underfoot. When I came back, my backpack was zipped shut. I froze. Now, that might not sound strange to most people, but I never zip my bag shut when I'm alone. It's a small habit I've had for years. When it's cold, you want to be able to reach in and grab whatever you need fast. Your light, your gloves, your knife. I always leave it half open. But now, not only was it zipped, the cinch cord on the inner compartment had been pulled tight and tied in a neat little knot I definitely didn't tie. That gave me pause. I crouched down, trying to come up with some dumb explanation. Wind? Maybe I brushed it before I left. But nothing else had moved. Not a pebble out of place. And I don't tie that knot. I opened it carefully and checked everything. Everything was there. Flashlight, filter, food, knife. Nothing missing. Except my thermal base layer was now folded and sitting right on top. That stopped me. I don't fold things out there. No one does. You roll or stuff and move on. And I had packed that base layer in the bottom. It's the kind of little thing that doesn't just happen on its own. I stood up and turned in a slow circle with my headlamp, scanning the dark. The woods were completely still. No footsteps. No broken twigs. The ground was frozen enough that if someone had walked through, the leaves and frost would have shifted. But I didn't see a thing. So I zipped the pack halfway, left the fire burning low, and climbed into the bivvy with the knife tucked near my chest. I didn't sleep. Not really. Around midnight, I was still lying there when I heard this soft, unnatural sound. Not snapping, not rustling. It was this bending noise, like something under slow, steady strain. My bivvy is just a fabric shell with one fiberglass hoop at the head, not a full tent. It's meant to be lightweight and simple. That hoop, it was bowing inward, just slightly. I didn't move. I just stared up as it flexed toward me, like someone outside was pressing a hand down against the fabric. Not hard, just enough to make it give a little. No wind, no weight, no weight. Just the slow bend of that arch like it was being pushed in by something or someone careful. Then it stopped. Went right back to shape. That was enough. I unzipped the bivvy slow, slid out with my knife in hand, and stood up by the fire. My breath clouded in front of me, but the air was still. I turned a slow circle again. Same trees, same quiet. Then I saw the map. It was no longer next to my sleeping gear. It had been moved, now sitting under a small rock beside the fire pit, open to the same page. The red mark had changed. It wasn't just a slash now. It had curved, hooked downward, stopping directly over the exact ridge where I was camped. I didn't touch it. I just stared at it for a long time. The rest of the night, I stayed by the fire, knife in hand, back against the rock shelf. I couldn't hear anything out in the trees. No animals, no wind, not even the usual cracks of settling branches. Just this eerie, absolute quiet. Every now and then, I'd hear a soft pop from the firewood or the distant creak of ice shifting above me. Around 5 in the morning, right before the light started to come back, I noticed something else on the map. A small, uneven square had been drawn next to the red line, the kind of thing someone would add by hand, not part of the map's print. Inside the square, there was faint handwriting, so light I had to crouch close to make it out. It said, "Resettled twice. Do not return." Same kind of lettering I'd seen carved into old survey markers way out in the backwoods. No punctuation, a little shaky but deliberate. I looked up toward the tree line, and that's when I saw it. Directly across from where I'd camped, maybe 20 yards out, was a low stack of old lumber half buried in snow. I hadn't noticed it before. It wasn't large, just a few weathered logs stacked maybe 4 or 5 high, with a sheet of rusted tin balanced on top. I got up and walked toward it, knife still in hand. The closer I got, the more it looked like something someone had started to build, then abandoned. The wood was old and gray, soaked through with age, and smelled like creosote and damp earth. Nails stuck out at odd angles, and there were remnants of something stenciled faintly across the tin, maybe a name or a number, long since rusted over. I pried up one edge of the tin. It was heavy, heavier than it looked. I was half expecting some hollow underneath, a root cellar, a den, something. But there was nothing under it. Just more wood, packed tight, like someone had sealed off a space that never got finished. That was it for me. I backed away, scanned the woods one last time. Still no movement, still no prints. The forest hadn't shifted. I packed everything up in minutes, shoved the map down into the bottom of my pack without looking at it again. My hands were shaking by the time I got my boots laced. The trail back felt longer somehow. The turns didn't line up quite like I remembered. I second-guessed every split, even though I knew them by heart. But I didn't stop. Just kept walking until the trees started to thin. When I reached my truck, I noticed a fresh scrape on the rear bumper. Long, thin, like something sharp had been dragged across it. I hadn't parked near anything. There wasn't a branch low enough, and I'd checked the truck before I left. I didn't think. I just got in and drove straight off the ridge. I stopped once, back in Harmonville, to grab coffee and call into work. Told them I needed a week off. I'm 31, and I've spent pretty much my whole life tucked into the Blue Ridge part of Appalachia. Back when this happened, I was working solo as a land surveyor. A lot of my days were spent trudging around with a clipboard and a couple layers of gear, checking lines, confirming corners, flagging boundaries. This job came in late December, right before Christmas actually. A parcel up in a less traveled section near where the forest thickens fast and cell service drops out before you even park. No big deal. I'd been sent the county's GIS map and some older hand-drawn sketches, probably from the 70s, judging by the paper. I printed a couple copies and loaded up. It wasn't a huge property, just under 20 acres, but rugged. Narrow trails, steep switchbacks, and at least one old timber road that had all but disappeared under underbrush. I didn't head out until mid-afternoon. Looking back, that was my first mistake. I'd spent the morning on another site and figured I had just enough daylight to get through this one. Maybe an hour and a half of decent light if I moved quick. When I got to the access point, the snow on the ground was already packed in icy sheets, not deep, but slick in spots where the sun hadn't touched it for days. The hike in started okay, and I dropped flags at every few turns like usual, bright orange strips tied to limbs about shoulder height. That's how I always did it. Quick knots, snug enough not to fall but easy to spot on the way out. About 40 minutes in, I hit a bend where the land dipped sharply down into a pocket that seemed colder than everywhere else. That's where I realized I'd underestimated the loop. What I thought would be a short hike was actually more of a full circuit, and with the way the slope wrapped, I wasn't getting back the same way I came in. Still, I wasn't worried. I had everything I needed: layered clothing, water, a backup headlamp, extra batteries. I kept moving. My boots crunched through the ice crust as I angled back toward where the ridge should level out. Then I heard it. Not wind. Not wind. Not snow falling from a branch. Just this one solid knock, like a bat smacking a tree trunk. Sharp. Intentional. It echoed through the holler once. That was it. No follow-up. I stopped walking and turned off my headlamp. Just stood there for a second, listening. But everything went still again. Nothing moved. No birds, no rustling. Just cold air and silence. At first, I thought it might have been a tree settling, or maybe even something falling in the distance, but the sound had direction, too crisp. Like someone had done it on purpose. That's when I felt it, that shift. Not panic exactly, but that tightening you get in your chest when something feels just a little off. I decided to head back fast. Follow the flags, retrace my path, and deal with the final markers another day. I wasn't up for wandering in the dark. About 10 minutes later, I saw one of the flags I placed, except it didn't look right. It was higher. A lot higher. At least 8 feet up, dangling from a branch I couldn't have reached without standing on something. And when I got closer, I realized it wasn't even my flag. Mine are always nylon fluorescent orange, cut in clean strips. This was a torn piece of some old cloth, looked like cotton. Dyed orange, tied in a sloppy knot, frayed on one end like it had been ripped from something. I just stood there, staring at it. Pulled out my map again like that was going to help, but there was no reason it should be there. I hadn't come through that stretch yet. It wasn't mine, and whoever put it up didn't know how to mark a boundary. It made no sense. Then I heard movement behind me. Not close, maybe 30, 40 yards downhill, but loud enough to break through the crusted snow. 2 steps, pause. 2 more. The rhythm was wrong. Too slow. Too spaced out. Not how deer move, and not heavy enough to be a bear, not that they'd be active this time of year. Step. 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 Pause. I shut off my headlamp again and ducked behind a fallen log. I could feel my breath clouding up in front of me, my gloves already damp from the snow. The sound came again. Step, step. Still spaced out, still deliberate. I couldn't place the direction exactly. It sounded like it moved, then disappeared, then came back from another spot, like it was circling. That's when I heard the voice, not talking. Not words, just this low, drawn-out sound. Like a hum, but not steady. It wavered, dropped, almost like someone imitating speech without saying anything real. Like remembering the shape of a sentence but forgetting the language. A man's voice, I think. Deep, but off somehow. Like he was practicing how to talk. I stayed crouched, couldn't make myself move. It was cold enough my knees started to stiffen, but I didn't care. That voice drifted in and out, the rhythm of it never matching anything I recognized. Like a dream where someone's trying to tell you something, but it keeps slipping away. When it finally faded for a second, I crawled, hands and knees through the brush, using the rhododendron to stay low. Every branch felt like it was snapping under me, but I kept going. No flashlight, just the shape of the land and the faintest hint of moonlight through the canopy. At the top of the ridge, I ran, just flat out. No more creeping, no more flags. I didn't care about tearing up my pants or knocking into brush. I could see my breath streaming in front of me, my lungs burning. My boots skidded on frozen patches, and I nearly lost my footing twice. I was maybe 100 yards from the road when I hit something strung between 2 trees. I thought it was wire. Backed up fast, heart racing, then leaned in to look. Shoelaces, tied end to end, strung like some weird fence. Dozens of them. Different colors, different sizes. Some were clean, some weren't. I ducked under and didn't stop moving. My truck was just ahead, parked where I'd left it, frosted over, headlights catching the snow. And then I saw the window, driver's side, rolled halfway down. I don't leave windows open, not in December, not ever. I reached the door, opened it fast, and paused. The seat was wet, damp like someone had been sitting there in soaked clothes. Not frozen, just cold and wet. I didn't look around, didn't check the back. I got in, slammed the door, locked it, and turned the ignition. The engine caught and I peeled out, not even bothering to warm it up. 40 miles out, I stopped at a gas station. Just sat there under the fluorescent lights, staring at my own reflection in the window. My seat still felt damp. I didn't go inside, just sat until my hands stopped shaking. That night, I emailed the buyer, told them I'd injured my ankle and couldn't finish the job. Didn't send a bill, didn't explain, just mailed their maps back and scrubbed the whole thing from my work log. I haven't set foot near that tract since. I sold off most of my gear by spring and switched to dispatch work. The land belonged to my uncle, a stretch of mostly unremarkable woods, about 30 minutes east of Elbridge. His cabin sat in a shallow basin just off an old trail that wasn't marked on any map. He'd cleared it years ago for deer season, just enough space for the prefab and a half-rotted deck that sagged under its own weight. It was never meant to be lived in, just somewhere to crash after a hunt. He said if I helped with splitting and stacking the wood, he'd throw me a little cash. Not enough to brag about, but enough to make the drive worth it. And I liked the work quiet, straightforward, satisfying in a way that my regular job never was. That Friday, I loaded up the truck and headed out mid-morning. A storm was coming in overnight, and I wanted to finish the last pile before the snow got too deep. The trailhead was already slushy when I pulled in, all wet tire ruts and patches of sleet. I had my thermos full, gloves stuffed into my jacket, lantern packed, and the axe wrapped in canvas in the bed. My plan was basic: get in, work until I lost the light, eat something simple, sleep, and hike out at first light. No fuss. I started chopping just after noon. The axe should have been sharper, but I figured I'd make do. Each swing cracked through the clearing like a gunshot and then echoed back, but slower than I expected, like the sound was coming through water. That whole area is weird acoustically. Some people say it's the shale in the hills or the way cold air settles in the gullies. It never bothered me before, but that day it made me feel like someone was answering me from far off. By 4, I was taking my first real break. My arms were starting to tire out, and the sky had gone that pale, washed-out blue you get in December when daylight just sort of gives up. I sat on the edge of the deck with my thermos, watching steam curl out of the lid, when I noticed something across the clearing. 3 upright shapes, not far from the tree line, maybe 20 feet or so, just standing there like they'd always been there. Except I knew they hadn't. I'd been over there earlier clearing brush and hauling logs, and there was nothing then. No piles, no stumps. I got up and walked over. They looked like trees at first. Short ones, maybe 5 feet tall, stripped of bark, no branches, no needles. Just 3 smooth, pale trunks standing straight in the snow like fence posts. Except they weren't rooted. I knelt and looked closer. Each base had been shaved completely flat, like someone had sanded them down with a belt grinder. I nudged the middle one. It wobbled. Not much, but enough to know it wasn't planted. No tracks either. I circled them slowly, checking the snow for footprints or drag marks. Nothing. It looked like they'd just appeared, dropped from the sky. Clean indentations underneath, no scuffing or disturbance in the powder around them. I pushed all 3 over. They fell without resistance, rolled them to the side, half expecting to find something underneath, but there was just snow. Cold and undisturbed. That was the first time I really felt it, this strange pull at the back of my neck. Not fear exactly, just a tight, quiet tension, like I'd wandered into something I wasn't supposed to see. Back at the cabin, I locked up the axe and went inside. The heater clicked on eventually, coughing a little before the warm air started flowing. I hung my gloves over the bunk rail, and poured the last of my coffee. Tried reading, but I kept drifting back to those trees. Kept wondering how they got there, why someone would bother. Around 7, I heard a crunch outside. At first, I figured it was a branch dropping snow. The kind of sound you can talk yourself out of. But then it came again, not sharp or sudden, just a slow, deliberate step. 1, then silence. I grabbed the lantern and stepped out. Snow was falling harder now, quick, dry flakes that didn't stick to anything. I scanned the clearing. Nothing moved. No animals, no wind. Just that quiet, heavy snowfall that makes everything feel padded. I walked once around the cabin, boots crunching through the crust. On the far side, leading down from the slope, I saw them. Boot prints. Just one set, not mine. They started about 15 feet out, came in a straight line toward the deck, and stopped just short of the steps. Then they turned back and disappeared into the brush like someone had changed their mind halfway through. I stood over them for a long time listening, trying to catch anything, the flap of a coat, a cough, breath, but there was nothing. Just me and those perfect prints. I went back inside, locked the door, checked it twice, pulled the cot closer and set the lantern near the window. The crunch came again around 8. Same spot, same rhythm. Never closer, never farther. It repeated every 20-30 minutes. I timed a few of them without meaning to. Just after 10, I heard a knock. One knock, not on the door. It came from the side wall low, near the baseboard. That wall faces nothing. No porch, no crawl space. Just frozen dirt and pine needles under 2 feet of snow. I didn't move. Just sat there staring at the paneling. Lantern flickered. I could see my breath. Another knock, softer, closer to the back corner. I stood, grabbed the axe, crept to the wall, and pressed my ear against it. Silence. I stepped outside again. My boots sank deeper than before. The snow was heavier now, falling fast, almost sideways. I circled the cabin again. No prints. No signs of anything touching the walls. But where I thought I'd heard the knock, the snow felt different. I crouched and brushed some away. It was warm. Not melted, just a little too soft. I pressed my glove into it, and I swear something underneath gave slightly, like I'd pressed on a padded surface. Something shifted just enough to change the shape. I backed off fast. Didn't look twice. Went straight back in, bolted the door, dragged the cot in front of it, and sat up with the axe across my lap until the lantern burned low. Around midnight, I checked the window one more time. The trees were back. Same 3. Upright. Upright. But now they were right at the edge of the fire pit, closer by at least 10 feet. I hadn't heard anything. No dragging. No branches breaking. They were just there again, perfectly still. At dawn, I threw everything into my pack. Didn't bother folding the cot or blowing out the lantern. Left the cabin door wide open. When I handed my uncle the keys, he didn't say much, just nodded, handed me an envelope with a check, and mentioned he'd be shutting the place down for the season. I didn't ask what he meant by season. Couple weeks later, I ran into a local guy named Gene, traps mink and bobcat in the Ridge Valleys. He mentioned seeing something weird near the northeast slope, trees stripped clean, standing in weird little clusters, bottoms all shaved flat like someone tried to turn them into stakes. Said they were in places you couldn't reach with a truck, just standing there, miles from any road. I was 27 when I took the forestry tech job in Ravenshade. The job paid just enough to keep my head above water, and it came with free housing, if you could call it that. They put me up in this old trailer about 10 miles off the main road, parked in a clearing just big enough to turn a truck around in. The official title was Firewatch Technician, but that was a bit generous considering it was December. The fire risk was practically zero by that time of year. What they really needed was someone to monitor trail conditions, collect footage from the mounted cameras, and keep an eye on the tree health, looking for disease, damage, that kind of thing. Most days were slow. I hiked, wrote notes, swapped memory cards, and drank way too much instant coffee. It was quiet out there. That kind of quiet that makes you hyper-aware of every sound, every creak, every gust of wind through the trees. I remember telling myself the silence was the best part of the job. No traffic, no phones, no people asking for favors. Just time to think. But some silences feel heavier than others. You only notice it after a few days, when your own thoughts start echoing back at you. That night, I was reviewing footage from the North Loop. It was one of the longer trails, a gradual climb with a few good overlooks. The wind had picked up earlier in the day, sharp enough to rattle the trailer windows, and the snow was crusting over, brittle and dry. I was halfway through copying memory cards when something in one of the clips caught my eye. Just a flash. A shape, blurry near the edge of the frame. Someone in a red jacket. I paused it, leaned in. The image wasn't great. These were trail cams, not high-end security systems, but the figure was definitely there. You could make out the silhouette, broad shoulders, arms close to the sides, not walking, not moving, just standing. And it was recent. I checked the timestamp. The clip was recorded maybe 20 minutes before I'd gotten there. That's what made me pause. I'd just been at that spot not long after that clip was taken. I hadn't seen anyone on the trail, and there hadn't been any prints except mine. I'd checked without really meaning to. Just a quick look behind me, like you do when something feels off. My boot tracks were the only ones on the path, already hardening into icy imprints. I watched the next few clips. Nothing. No red jacket. No sign of anyone coming or going. I even rewound a bit, thinking maybe I missed a second shot of the person moving through the frame. But no. Just that one blurry appearance. I logged it as a lens flare or a sensor error. That was the easiest explanation. Cameras glitch sometimes, especially cheap ones that have been out in freezing temperatures. Still, I packed the card back into my case with this vague sense that I was trying to convince myself more than anything. By the time I hiked back to the trailer, the sun had dipped behind the ridge and the sky had gone, that washed out blue that means night's coming fast. I saw it the second I stepped into the clearing. The trailer door was open, not wide, just a few inches, enough that the wind had pushed a skim of snow through the gap and across the floor. I stopped, just stood there a second. I knew I'd latched it before I left, not locked. It didn't have an exterior lock, but the latch was stiff and it took a firm hand to close. It didn't come undone by accident. I stepped inside slowly, like I was expecting to find someone waiting. But everything looked untouched. My gear was still where I'd left it. Backpack on the cot, notebook open on the desk. The kettle on the stove was warm, like the propane had kicked off not too long ago. Then I saw the boots. They were sitting right next to mine by the door, but they weren't mine. They were smaller, newer, looked almost brand new and completely dry. I knelt to look, cold to the touch but not frozen, like they'd just been taken off. And there was a tag still inside one of them, written in French. I don't speak much French, just enough to know it wasn't a brand I recognized. It struck me as weird right away. Nobody in the area was from Quebec or anywhere that spoke French, not that I knew of, and no one else was scheduled to be up on this part of the range. I checked the trail log to be sure. Nothing. No entries for the last 2 weeks. No hikers reported in the area. I should have called it in, but I didn't. I was trying to be rational, trying not to turn a weird boot discovery into a panic attack. Maybe someone left them weeks ago and I just never noticed. Maybe someone dropped off supplies and didn't log it. There were ways to explain it. I moved the boots near the stove. Figured if they'd been out in the cold, they could dry off even though they weren't wet. Later that night, around 9, I put them in the supply closet. Out of sight, out of mind. But sleep didn't come easy. The wind had died down, but I kept hearing things. Not loud, just these soft, rhythmic thuds. Like something heavy being set down gently outside. Not footsteps, not branches. Just a sound that repeated every few minutes, low and dull. Once or twice, it sounded like it came from the roof. I didn't move. I lay there under the blanket, staring at the ceiling, my pulse in my ears. I tried telling myself it was just the trailer creaking in the cold. By morning, the sky was pale and washed out. I got up, made some coffee, and checked around outside. Nothing looked disturbed. No branches had fallen. No prints in the snow. Nothing. I was ready to write it all off. Just a weird night in the woods, until I opened the closet. The boots were gone. I stood there a moment, just staring into the space where they'd been. Then I opened the trailer door and scanned the clearing. Still no prints. I walked a slow lap around the trailer, my breath fogging up in front of me. And then, on the far side, half buried beneath the window, I saw it. A glove. Red. Same shade as the jacket from the camera footage. I didn't touch it. I went back inside, locked the door, really locked it this time, used a screwdriver to wedge the latch, and sat down by the window with my notebook. I didn't write anything, just sat there all day, keeping the lights on, not even pretending to work. Next morning, I found the glove again. This time, it was on the counter, right next to the sink. Clean, dry, just placed there. I didn't hesitate after that. Threw my gear into my pack, left the cameras and logs, and locked the trailer from the outside. I radioed base, told them I was coming down a day early because of a system failure. No one questioned it. On the way down the ridge, I kept my head low, boots moving fast. I didn't let myself look back until I reached the last bend before the trail dropped out of view.